Hi friends, so glad you're back with us today for our See the Light, Yes You Can Draw Club. This is Club Meeting 23. I'm Pat Nepley, I'm your master artist. I'll be with you for all of these club meetings. I hope you brought a friend along. Okay, so what do we need for today's lesson? Couple things. You'll need a sheet of paper, white. I would prefer a larger size if you can get it, but if you just have copy paper, that's fine. A standard pencil, a softer pencil like a 4B, a great eraser, really important for today's lesson, a straight edge or ruler, something round that you can trace a circle with. Great! Okay, so we've been talking about the art elements through all of these club meetings. Do you remember what they are? Line, shape, space, value, color, texture. Well, now we're going to learn about our last art element, form. And I want you to really understand what form is. Now, form is very closely related to another art element, shape. You remember shape, circle, square, triangle, rectangle. Those are shapes. But when we say shape, we're talking about something that's flat. But when we're talking about form, we're talking about something that has three dimensions: length, width, and depth. Okay. So to understand form, it's important to look at shape first and what it is that translates shape from being flat to form from being 3D. Now, in real life, form is something that really is 3D. This is a ball or a sphere. If you were to draw it, you would start off with the shape, a circle. So form is used in art to describe sculpture, something that really is 3D. But this is a drawing club, and drawing is on a flat surface or paper. So how do you make something look like it has form as opposed to flat shape? That's what we're going to talk about today, and we'll get a chance to experiment in really showing form. One way that you can show form is with contour lines. So, for example, if I were to take my pencil, I would show a circle with a contour line. But if I knew it was really an orange, by making some other contour lines, I would suggest its form. But sometimes lines won't do. How do you make something look real? If you're doing a painting with hills in the background, you want them to look like they're rolling, moving hills, real large forms. So you would do that through value and texture using some other art elements that we've talked about at prior club meetings. So for today, this is not a finished drawing. This is more of a study, a form study. So to get started, we're going to start with shape and turn it into form. So to get started, on your paper, which I want you to lay across lengthwise, we're going to make three shapes. Your first shape, you'll just take your round object and you're going to trace. And about our left-hand side, just very quickly with your standard pencil, just trace the round shape. And you can see we got our shape. Our next shape is going to be a triangle. If you look at my sample down here, it's actually a very long triangle. And this will need our straight edge or our ruler. And this is going to be in the center. And I want to make the triangle long. And if I'm making a triangle, it would end at about halfway through the circle, like that. Okay? So I have a circle and a triangle. And the next shape is going to be a rectangle. And again, I want to use my ruler for this. And it's going to be at about the same level on my paper as my circle. This is going to be a long, skinny rectangle, like this. Now I can see that my line isn't as straight as I'd like, so I'm going to erase it. Great thing about pencil, you can always erase. Now right now I simply have three shapes: a circle, a triangle, and a rectangle. But I want them to have depth. I want them to look three-dimensional. So how do I create the form? Couple of ways. The first way is with lines, additional lines. And this is a little lesson in perspective. Now, at one of our future club meetings, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about perspective. But since our rectangle, if I want it to look like a rectangular prism or box, I need to be able to show the depth with additional lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a line that's parallel to my top of my rectangle, parallel in the same direction. I'm going to make it slightly to the right. So it's the same length, but not exactly above it, slightly to the right. And then I will connect the front edge to the back edge, like that. That then becomes the top of our rectangular prism or our box. I have the side edge of my rectangle. Again, I want to make a parallel line coming straight down that represents the back edge. And then I would connect these lines. So you see, I've already created the illusion of depth or form with additional lines using perspective. But there's no additional lines that I can do for my triangle or my circle. What can I do there? Well, in order to show form, I need to use value and texture. Now, if I were to use these styrofoam forms over here, I'm not going to worry about trying to show the texture of styrofoam. I really just want to focus in on that they're 3D forms. So I'm going to do value. Now for our circle, do you remember when we had our club meeting where we learned about value, where we shaded a sphere? What's going to happen is by changing our value, look at our sample down here, where the value is light to the left and gets darker as it moves to the right. We're assuming there's a light source over here. And by showing the change in value as the light moves around the sphere, creates the illusion that it's three-dimensional. It's no longer a flat circle. So we're going to do the same thing here. Now I've drawn my lines kind of dark so that you can see them, but I want you to draw your lines light. So remember the trick for drawing your lines light? In the basic grip, you simply pull your fingers away from the point, and then you have your lighter lines. So to start, I'm going to use my hand in the overhand grip and very lightly shade in a light tone of gray in my circle, like this. And I'll use my finger to blend. And that's okay. This is a form study. We're trying to show form. So after I have my light gray tone, so that's my first value, I now need to show the change in value to make it go from a flat circle to a 3D form. So remember, when we go to shade a sphere, we pretend that we're working with a clock. And so the top is 12 o'clock, the bottom is 6 o'clock. I hope you have a clock somewhere, not a digital clock, not an LCD clock, but an old-fashioned clock with all the numbers around the face of the clock. So if I use that as my guide, then from about 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock, I'm going to shade a slightly darker crescent. And I'll go to the edge of my circle, and I'm going to blend it in. Now it looks a little too stripy for me. I can kind of see it where the two tones meet, and I want that to be more gradual. Now inside that tone that I just did, that medium gray tone, at about 3 o'clock I'm going to start to do a darker crescent all the way down to about 6 o'clock and blend it in. And with my eraser, at about 10 o'clock, between 10 and 11 o'clock, I'm actually going to erase out like a smudge to show a highlight. Now you can spend a lot of time, my friends, really getting these values exactly right and nice and gradual, because the change in value around the surface of the sphere is what changes it from a flat circle to a form. We're going to wait on the shadows, now we're going to go to our triangle. Well, this is no longer a triangle. We want it to look like a cone. And a cone is a rounded surface, just like our sphere. So the same principle applies. It's going to be light on this side. We're going to assume there's a light source over here, and it will get darker as it turns over the surface of the cone. But right now it's a flat triangle. So the first step is to change this flat bottom, which I'm going to erase, and give it a slight curve. And that tells the viewer that this is a cone. So just a very slight curve. Now leave this side white, or the color of your paper, and we're going to shade as we go to the other side. Now, here's a little tip for you. I can't do it because I'm at an easel. But you, when you're shading, you don't have to keep your paper straight up just like the finished product would be. You can turn your paper. If it's easier to shade your cone by turning your paper to the side, perfect. You're the artist. And so you're going to work in the way that's going to get you the best results. I can't really turn my easel, so I'm going to just work with what I have, and I might kind of twist and turn a little bit. You can turn your paper. Hold your pencil in the overhand grip, and since this far edge on the right is going to be darker, we're going to make darker strokes. And here's the ticket. We're coming back around, and we want to get lighter as we come to the left. And that's because our light source is coming from that side. So I'm going to lighten up on my pressure as I go towards the center of the cone. And by the time I'm about center of the cone, I don't want to have any more pressure at all. So pressure, 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 lighter, lighter, lighter. I'm halfway through. I want to stop. And I'll use my finger to blend. Now, the more time you spend on this, friends, then you can get your change in value to be exactly right. What you don't want is it to look like stripes. You don't want to put down a dark layer of pencil in a long stripe and then another layer in another stripe that's lighter. We want to have a gradual blending of the tone so that our darker value is to the right and our lighter value is to the left where our light source is. So you can see at my example down here, going from light to dark and having this rounded bottom tells the viewer that this is no longer a flat triangle, but it's a cone. Now what about when you get to a rectangle? That's not a curved surface. So you're not going to have a gradual change in value around the surface like you would for a sphere or a cone. Those are flat edges. So the key to showing form through value in something like that is where the two edges meet. The change in value where the edges meet. So rather than drawing dark lines, now remember I drew slightly darker lines so that you can see it for the camera, but really you want to create a nice crisp edge by how you shade the two planes. So since the top is probably the lights coming from here, this will be our lightest surface, the top of our rectangular box. So you're only going to put in the very, very lightest value. Now, when you're shading something that's flat, you want to have your strokes or your marks go in the direction. So I'm not going to do my shading in a circular motion. I'm going to keep it nice and straight since it's a flat surface. Remember, I'm not worried about texture here. I just want to show change in value. So that's going to be my lightest value. This surface, which is going vertically, probably only getting a little bit of the light, will be like my medium tone. Now I can do it two ways. I can either go all in this direction or I can go in this direction, but I want to stay in the same direction. So this is going to be a medium tone. Now since I'm taking short strokes, you can see here, and see how far back my hands are for my overhand grip? I'm not right up at my point because I don't want to press too hard. I'm not making the really darkest side yet. I'm not doing the shadows yet. So to help myself keep it lighter, I have my hand way back from my point. Now it's tricky to get a tone really even when you have a really flat surface. You can see I kind of have some spots that are darker. And this is where my eraser comes in handy. I don't want to take away all the pencil I just put, but I want to try and even it out. Also, I use my finger for blending. So when I have my medium tone, I want to make sure I have a nice edge against my lighter tone. So I'm going to go back and make sure it's nice and crisp so that I create a really strong edge. So instead of having a gradual change in value going around a curved surface, I simply have values of flat planes that meet at an edge. Because the end of my box is away from the light entirely, that's going to be our darkest value before we even get to shadow. So I'm going to press harder with my pencil. I'm going to try and make my strokes very carefully so that I create a nice edge. And where those planes meet now tells the viewer, aha, this is a box. Okay, so the last step in really showing that these are three-dimensional forms is laying down our shadows. And because we've said that our light source is coming from the left, that means our shadows have to be casting to the right. So let's draw a line behind our cone that will represent our table line. Don't go through your cone. And so for our sphere, it is a flattened ellipse. Start right at the bottom of the circle, and you're going to have a line that comes parallel to the bottom edge of your paper. And it's a very thin, flat ellipse that then comes up and meets the sphere. And this is where you get to apply the darkest pressure of all. So you will hold your pencil in your basic grip. This is your nice soft pencil, and you're going to shade that in really dark and try and make it nice and even. Now our cone is, the shadow is a very tall shadow because it's a very tall object, but it's behind, the shadow would be behind our box just because of where we placed it. So you really wouldn't see a lot of the shadow. So starting at about halfway of the cone, again, draw a line that's parallel to the edge of your paper, but it's going to have to stop when you meet up with your box. And then come about maybe a ½ inch up on the side of your cone. And you're going to start to head out as if you're going to head to a point, but again, it's going to be hidden behind the box. Your shadow would have a point just like your cone, but it would not be as long or as tall as your total cone. If the light source was way up high, the cone shadow would be short. If the light source was very far away and at a low angle, then the shadow would be very long. Maybe you've noticed that. Maybe you've been playing with friends and it's the middle of the day and the sun is right above you, way up high. Your shadow is actually pretty small, probably just right around your feet. But if it's the end of the day and the sun is low in the sky, you cast a very long shadow. Next time you're outside on a sunny day, you watch and you see, depending on the time of day and where in the sky the sun is, how long your shadow is. So this shadow is hiding behind our box, but you can already see by creating a really dark value for the shadow against that really light top of the box, makes that form pop out even more. Now our shadow for our box is not long like this rectangle, but since this is a shallow box, it's short, the shadow would actually be fairly short. And it would just be a flattened rectangle with an angle just like going parallel to that edge, that side edge. And as I shade that in, that becomes then the darkest value on the paper. Now you might think, well, this is a lesson on value. Well, kind of. You know that value is the lights and darks in a drawing. But value and texture and shape and space, all of these art elements all work together to make really realistic drawings. And form, our final art element, is a 3D art element, form. But how do you show that in a drawing? By using the other art elements, specifically value. So here we've taken something that was a flat circle, a flat triangle, and a flat rectangle and made it pop off the page as 3D forms by careful placement of value. You know, form is an amazing thing, right? Form. It could be anything. A person is a form. In fact, look at these two famous pieces of artwork where the human form is treated so differently. The first piece of art is by a Colombian artist named Fernando Botero. Botero is known for making all of his people very large and round. It's still the human form, but the way he decided to treat it is very round. In contrast to that, we see the artist Modigliani. All of his human forms are very stretched out. Look at how long the woman's neck is, her head, even the length of her nose. This is how Modigliani chose to express the human form. So remember, form has 3 dimensions: length, width, and depth. Sometimes you call it height, but there's always 3 dimensions so that you can change something flat into something that pops off the page. You know, there's a Bible verse about form. Maybe you're not aware of it. I bet you know some of the story, but I want you to know the whole story. It's in the Old Testament. Do you remember the great Old Testament leader Moses? He was a great man of God, and God gave him a very important task. His people, the Israelites, were trapped in bondage in Egypt, and Moses was charged with taking them to the Promised Land. It took a very long time, and he had to take them through some pretty difficult circumstances. Well, there's a portion in Scripture that uses the idea of form because, see, God appeared to the Israelites when they were going through the desert at a very special place called Mount Horeb. Sometimes it's called Mount Sinai, but it's a very special place. And when God appeared, he appeared as a voice coming out of the fire. Let me read to you what it says in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 4:15. Moses is talking to the people of Israel. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourselves an idol, an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman, or any animal on earth, or any bird that flies in the air, or like any creature that moves along the ground, or any fish in waters below. See, Moses was giving them a warning. God had no form. He's not anything we can imagine because he's so much bigger and greater than anything physical on earth that we can see, any form of things that we know. And so when he came to the people of Israel, he came as a voice out of the fire. But you know what happened? Even though Moses had reminded them, and he did remind them a lot of what they should and shouldn't be doing in order to obey God, when they were waiting for Moses when he was up on the mount one day, he was gone for a long time, and they got restless. And do you know the rest of the story? What did those Israelites do? They actually made a form, a golden statue that looked like a calf, because they wanted something to worship. They got too impatient. They wanted God to appear again, and they decided to give him form, when very clearly it says here, there was no form of any kind. God had no form. Those Israelites had a tough time obeying. They were so impatient to get a form that they wanted. We learn a lot about Moses in the Old Testament and how God still remained faithful to his people even when they were disobedient. Well, I hope you've learned about form today and the last of our art elements. The combination of all of these art elements and how to use them together is what's going to make you a great artist, because yes, you can draw. And I look forward to when we're together next time. I'll see you again.